I'm originally from Seattle and then was in Blair for a little bit.
Everyone came in person. I think that's why we ran out of seats. Like we're down 3 people and we're still like running out of seats. Here's Mark. Hey, Mark. Oh, shoot, realize. Well, you mean Michael can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
I was like, no, I was thinking about it. And I was like, I probably should have gone.
It's better to just go more because like get one for each because it's easy to pawn them off like
Yeah.
yeah.
I looked at the catering for like seat 10 today. People, so, like, I don't know. I feel like I should have gotten sandwiches.
Yeah.
Next time.
Well, at least
I can also grab some chips upstairs.
that's not a bad idea. Well, let's just do it when we break for lunch. Yeah, because I think we should start. We should go ahead and get started, Mark. Do you have will you, let's grab him an agenda.
Oh,
I can take this from you so I don't forget. I'm gonna catch you again. Usually but here, Megan, and this is also more fun for Ashley.
sorry. Yes. Hi. Here. Hi.
So I don't forget. Are we good?
Neil. Is Neil?
Well, hang on one second, just because I want to figure out the echo first.
Can people online hear us? Can we get a thumbs up?
No one's online right now. We need to figure out the echo. Oh, before we figure anything else out.
Are you muted?
Before we figure anything else out. Okay.
Well.
Okay, so I don't think we have Neil yet. Is that right?
Neil's on vacation.
Oh, is he? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Nick.
Before we figure anything else out.
Nick
is
not there.
okay. And we're on vacation.
Okay, so, right, okay, so I don't think we have Neil yet.
Neil's on vacation.
I didn't catch that.
I think it's a.
Nick.
Before we figure anything else out. Nick is
Not there.
okay. And we're on vacation.
Okay, so, right, okay, so I don't think we have Neil yet.
Neil's on vacation.
I didn't catch that.
I think it's a.
Nick.
Before we figure anything else out.
Hello? Hello.
Can folks hear us?
And it looks like from our panelists and attendees, we don't have any of the ex officios. Is that correct?
Correct. We have some ex officios here.
Can folks hear us?
We do, one of the attendees is one of our.
And it looks like from
Right,
our
Wayne, I'm gonna bring you over.
panelists and attendees, we don't have any of the ex officios. Is that correct?
Introduce yourself.
Correct.
We have some ex officios here.
Can folks hear us?
We do, one of the attendees is one of our.
And it looks like from
Right,
our
Wayne, I'm gonna bring you over.
panelists and attendees, we don't have the ex officios. Is that correct?
Introduce yourself. We have
It's
some
a big delay.
ex officios here. One of the attendees is one of our.
And it looks like from
Right,
our
Wayne, I'm gonna bring you over.
panelists and attendees, we don't have the ex officios. Is that correct?
Introduce yourself.
It's a big delay.
But they had a lot of tech issues, if it makes you feel any better.
That might be it.
Figured it out. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
We did figure it
We're
out.
a little, yeah, we're constantly kind of shifting the tech support roles, so
Are we good? Should I let Megan know we're good?
We had a lot of internet issues, so I bet that's what was happening then, yeah. Okay.
Okay,
We
I think,
figured it out. It was, the live stream was on in the background.
Oh, snap. Okay, so we're good.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
Here,
Yeah. Okay, sorry about
and they
that.
can hear us, right? Like, did we figure that out?
We haven't confirmed that.
We haven't confirmed that, but
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
okay, we're good. Thanks.
oh, good. Thank you.
thumbs up.
Whew. Usually doesn't happen like that.
Well, we gotta.
But that's all okay.
That might
With all
be
the issues
for
or did we
public
do it
comment when we
again,
get
or-
to that.
It's fine because I believe minutes too, so. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, I'll keep going on. Okay, so I hope everyone had a chance, if you were here at the last meeting, to look at the minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? I don't believe so. Have we decided we don't need to actually do an approval and vote on the minutes?
We don't have to vote
Okay.
on them. Yeah, it's just, does everyone agree with? the
Everyone's
minutes of it?
comfortable if you were involved and saw them. So, okay.
Mark, did we get through the whole roll call?
I thought we did. I know I didn't read Rory's because we'd already heard that
Okay,
he wasn't
gotcha.
here. Yeah, when Cassie said that Neil and Rory were on vacation, so I didn't read their names. But I think otherwise. Did it look like we got roll call complete?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. So I think we're on to public comment at this point, yes?
Yes, so if anyone who's attending online or anyone who's here in the public wants to make a public comment, if you're online, you can use the raise hand function on your Zoom screen, and then I can give you the ability to talk and share your comment. Or anyone in the audience can raise their hands.
There was that hand raised.
She was just letting us know that she could, that they could hear, which was much appreciated.
Okay, so it seems like we don't have any public comment.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll move on to staff updates.
Okay, just a couple of updates, just really quick about our agenda today. We do have a fairly light agenda. The most exciting thing happening today is that we're welcoming 3 new committee members. So we'll take some time to do introductions, and then we have an update for you on the Climate Action Partner Grant Program, and then an update on our next steps for our electrification fee and incentives policy work. And then Mark is going to share out an update from the participation he's been doing for the Invest Bend plan. So all updates, I'm hopeful that we have a little bit of time at the end to kind of talk about agendas for the next couple of months, because we're at another point where we do have a little bit of flexibility for our agenda over the next couple of months, with the exception of October. So anyway, that's kind of the goal today. And then, like I said, just a couple of light updates, which is that, we're welcoming our 3 new members. So we'll go around and do introductions in a moment, but we have Amy, Ken, and Robin all joining us today. And then we did also appoint 2 new alternates, Rebecca Kay and Wayne Mortar. Becca's here in the audience, so she'll do her introduction, and then Wayne is online, so we'll have them introduce themselves as well. And we don't always do alternates. It kind of just, the counselors approach it a little bit differently each recruitment period, but the way the alternates work is that if there is a vacancy on the committee midterm, for a 1-year period from when they're appointed, the alternates can just kind of slide right in and fill that seat. And so they join the orientation. So they're up to speed. So that will help us not have a couple of vacancies like sometimes happens for a couple of months. And then Counselor Platt is here today. I think Counselor Platt is our alternate council liaison, correct? And during the school year, he's a school teacher. So during the school year, he's not able to attend our meeting time. So in the summer, he is also going to be joining, although this is probably the last one.
And I would love it if you'd make them so I could attend them during the school. That'd be great.
And then the other big update is that we launched the Climate Action Partner Grant Program officially. So that's really exciting. And we have a whole, Megan will share an update on that program, so we can talk more about that in a minute. So I think we should just move on to introductions. I'm going to take my screen down. So that those online can see a little better. But I love if we could just all go down the line, not just the new committee members, but everyone go through and just introduce yourself, share how long you've been on the committee. And then if you want to share like just really brief sentence, 1 to 3 sentences about kind of your interest in the committee, whether that's your professional background, your personal experience, or kind of what brought you to serving on the ECC would be great. So if Mark, you want to start over on your end.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Buckley. I've been with the committee since it began, and I'm the chair now, relatively newly, this past year. I guess my day job, I'm an environmental economist with Echo Northwest. So most of my work involves some dimension of economic and financial analysis around water, land use, energy, climate. So I'm interested in bringing data and empirical and at times theoretical approach to what we do. I've also I've served as the committee's liaison to the water advisory group for the city's water utilities, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, and let's see what else. Yes, I've been working with the Invest Bend program lately. I'll tell you more about that later. So pass it off to Ray then.
Right on. Thanks, Mark. Ray Hartwell here. I have been on the committee just this year. So I think January was my first meeting. So just half a year's worth of meetings. And yeah, I am a consultant. I do a lot of conservation program design, mostly with respect to energy efficiency programs and also some environmental water. So that was my topical interest.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Davies. Excited to be here. My day job is with the Oregon Department of Energy and working on their building performance standard program. Before moving to Bend about 4.5 years ago now, I was with City of San Jose's Environmental Services Department for 22 years. Huge department, 550 people, worked in regulatory watershed protection last 5 years or so in sustainability and climate, and finished out as their deputy director of their climate program, Climate Smart San Jose. And what was the last question?
I think that was good.
Okay.
All right, hi, Al, Scott Nordquist. I also started the committee in 2025, the beginning of the year. I work for Bend Redmond Habitat for Humanity, so experience in affordable housing world, equity, restore waste and materials world, and then personal level, also enjoy the transportation world.
I'm Laura Tabor. I have been with the committee in a personal capacity for about 2 years and just a couple months in as vice chair. My day job background, I started out my career in energy efficiency consulting and then moved into state climate and energy policy. I currently work for the Public Utility Commission in Oregon. And yeah, really excited to just be able to bring both the technical and policy perspective and apply it at a local level with the committee.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Kavi Choksi, he, him pronouns. And if it helps for pronunciation, my name's spelled K-A-V-I, but it's pronounced like a covey, like a covey of quails, if it helps anyone. I've been on the committee since it started, which I just realized Cassie mentioned it's 5 years now. And before joining the committee, I think I had more experience on the climate activism side, helped organize one of the first climate strikes that Bend had. And I had been getting more and more interested in the climate action side. So it's good to be on a committee, but often I feel like I'm usually pushing for like more and faster, but I also know that we're limited on the city side. And my day job is I manage the Rethink Waste project of the Environmental Center. And so I'm also very interested on the materials side. I think there's a lot of opportunities there that I think this committee and the city can really lead on. And my background's in marketing entrepreneurship. And so I think I'm also usually looking at things on how can we get the community more engaged and how can we present these things in a way that can really bring a kind of culture shift in Bend as well, in addition to like the policy side of things.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Brainart. I am brand new to the committee. In my day job, I work for a nonprofit called EAH Housing, and I'm their sustainability lead. I work in building electrification and water efficiency. So kind of taking a look at whole building multifamily apartments and trying to make them as efficient as possible. A lot of my work is kind of in other states. And so I'm really excited to bring in my knowledge and be on the committee.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Leadham, and I'm also brand new. I've been in Bend for 3 years. I moved here from the Bay Area, and I work as a sustainability consultant. I'm an architect, so focusing on the built environment and kind of all issues with sustainability, from water to material toxicity and everything in between. But I think my expertise is around embodied carbon and materials. So that's the area that I know the most about, but I'm excited to address all the different topics.
Great, thank you. And then I love our alternates. Becca, if you want to start, and I'm really sorry to do this to you, but if you could come up to the microphone over here, just because otherwise people online can't hear, unfortunately, if you're in the audience.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Becca, new alternate member. So I'll be watching, listening, learning. I've been in Bend for 5 years, worked in the environmental world, primarily in outreach, and also dabbled in policy. So super interested in this. Have a degree in environmental studies. Right now I'm doing climate tech content marketing. So I work with a lot of really cool companies on the cutting edge of climate tech solutions. Really excited to bring some of those insights to this committee.
Thank you. And then Wayne, I know you're online. If you want to just jump on for a minute and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Wayne Mortar. I'm retired from the power industry. I've worked for some large utilities that were city-owned in Austin, Texas, and Seattle. Been in Bend for about 5 years. There, I've been involved in power management consulting. Basically, I've been procuring energy for some data centers in Oregon, and then most recently helping Seattle with procuring some renewable energy. So I'm looking forward to pitch it in where I'm asked, and listening to the work of the committee, which I've admired. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Cool. Thanks, everyone. So this is our new group. Cubby?
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
About alternates. If I remember, I think in the past, at one point they were able to like chime in on discussions, but I think we changed that. Is that still accurate that they're just kind of listening in for them?
Yes, that's the way it works. You're right. The first year that we were in existence, we were in a period of time at the city where alternates were able to sit at the dais, join the discussion, and just not vote. And that was a rule change. Not Ian's confirming.
It's now reflected in the
It's now reflected in the code.
Thanks.
And I just wanted to add, especially for the new folks, if you'd like to get together, get a coffee or something sometime and hear a little bit about the history and where we've been. And really anyone, I know Neil, when he was chair for 4 years, he was great about that. I've probably been a little bit slow on that, but yeah. I think we have, would everyone have everyone's emails? Do we have that yet? And have you already walked through those logistics?
Well, we did an orientation. We tend to try to avoid email all, among members. But if anyone's interested in connecting over coffee with Mark or really any members, then maybe best to just kind of connect here and exchange info. And just a reminder not to deliberate on any topics relevant to the ECC in those casual chats.
Right, and we're not supposed to meet above a certain size.
Yeah,
right?
correct. Okay, the lawyers look unaffected, though.
Yeah, yes, correct.
And for new members, the other attorney in the back is Ian Lighthizer, our city attorney. So that's why he's chiming in a little bit too. Okay, we can move on then. Mark, you want to move us on?
Sorry, yes. We are on to our Climate Action Partner Grant Program update.
Cool. Yeah, so this is just a quick update on the program. And for new members, we just launched a Climate Action Partner Grant Program on July 21st. So we're kind of in the middle of it. Applications are closing September 21st, so we still kind of have some time for folks to apply. But just an update how it's going. We've received some good interest in the program, which is awesome.
We don't have a ton of applications submitted so far, so I definitely encourage you guys to reach out to your networks and friends and colleagues just to encourage them to actually submit applications. But we did hold our first info session last month and we got some good attention there. And then we also like uploaded the informational session online. So for folks who couldn't attend, they can still watch it, and then updated our FAQ section with just some good clarifying questions that we got. We've been promoting the program through our social media, through our local news outlets, and then through some in-person events. So going strong on promotion. In terms of what's next, we have our next and last info session on the 26th. And yeah, like I said, applications are closing September 21st, and then we'll bring it back to you guys with our staff recommendations, and just after we review for eligibility, we'll bring the recommendations to you guys where you'll deliberate at the October ECC meeting, and then yeah, award letters will be sent by October 23rd. So yeah, quick update, but it's going well. It's going good.
And I think the main thing for you all to be aware of, so at the October ECC meeting, we'll hold that most likely, unless it's a really small number of applicants, we'll hold probably the whole meeting to deliberate on award amounts. We may invite the applicants to, we'll invite them to come so that they can answer questions, but we may invite them to do short presentations. I think we're waiting to just kind of see what the applicant pool looks like to figure out. This is our first time doing it, so we're kind of learning about what the best process will be. But for all of you to just be ready, sort of the last week of September, first week of October, before the October ECC meeting, we will be expecting you all to be reviewing all the applications that we get. And again, we just don't know right now. That could be 4 or it could be 20. So we'll get those out to you as quickly as we can after we've done our eligibility review, but everyone kind of have that in your minds to do that. And we've only had not that many applicants submitted yet, but it is open for another 6 weeks or so. But we've had a fair number of people reach out, letting us know that they will be applying and kind of sharing a little bit about their project ideas. So I feel pretty optimistic that we'll get a nice, interesting set of projects to consider.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we've heard from community members is that being the eligibility to apply, you have to be either a nonprofit or a government entity. And so some folks are like, well, I'm not affiliated with a nonprofit, can I still apply? And so we're just encouraging folks that even if they don't fall under a nonprofit or a government entity, to partner up with an NGO or to submit, like an eligible entity to apply, because we know that's definitely a barrier and are trying to work through that. So
are there any questions about the grant program?
Yes, actually a question on the last thing that Megan just raised. I was reviewing our minutes from last meeting, and I thought that our discussion ended that it didn't have to be like a 501c3 is what the minutes records, that it could be other kinds of nonprofits or other kinds of groups, but it would be kind of decided by the committee. But I think we excluded for-profits. So I just want to kind of like see where that, or let me pull it up so I'm not like misspeaking for it. But I just felt like what I saw on the website didn't reflect that completely accurately.
So I think the language we've used is nonprofit on the website.
Yep.
So I think that leaves it pretty generalized.
Okay, yeah, I think it just said Selkirk added that the intent is to exclude for-profit and political organizations, but being a 501c3 is not a strict requirement if the applicant aligns with his council's intent. So I think what you're saying is accurate.
Yeah.
But if there are folks who are not registered as 501c3, I think we had mentioned we could still consider those like pass through.
I don't think, I think you were mainly referring to like for-profit businesses that were.
Yeah, because I know you had mentioned some other forms of nonprofit, like not a 501c3, but a 501c7 or something like that. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we're all on the same page then.
Any other questions? Okay, cool. We're excited about it. So,
no, super stoked. But yeah, definitely encourage her.
Well, can I ask one more question on that then? I just don't want that to, I think you mentioned that folks have reached out individually to you with that kind of concern as well.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking at the website, it just kind of says it's, this sentence is just that it's open for nonprofits and I don't have it in front of me, so I can't say it,
Government
but
agencies.
it just says nonprofits, and I wonder if that would unintentionally discourage some newly formed groups that are trying to do something that this could be really helpful for. I'm thinking about specifically the Central Oregon Tool Lending Library. Because when they came in front of us, they were so new that they did not have a nonprofit. They still don't have a nonprofit. They're using Habitat for Humanity Restore as a pass-through.
Right, and so typically then if they currently have the partnership with Habitat, like then that would be the partnership that would apply.
And I think
That makes
because
sense.
we specified nonprofit, but not 501c3, and so a 501c7 would still fall under nonprofit.
A question did come up for the tool lending library, for example, and I think we have it cleared up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what Megan was referring to, that you can, in that partnership, the nonprofit could apply, but the application would be essentially submitted on behalf of the tool library using the nonprofit as a partnership.
Oh, Michael.
Yeah, Covey, the issue is that if it's an assembly or a group of people and they don't have a legal entity, it's complicated to actually figure out who we're giving the money to, because we have to give it to an individual person, and it makes it, for legal and liability reasons, makes it difficult, if not impossible, to do. So there actually has to be an organization that's incorporated for us to give the money to. If it's an assembly of people that are working with or under another organization, so their name is the tool library, but they're affiliated or associated with Habitat, we can work with Habitat to give the money to Habitat.
Mhm.
And there's a way to do an arrangement so that money then flows down to it's essentially like a subcontractor, but the sub unit of people or group of people that are doing work with Habitat. We actually have to have an entity to give the money to. It can't be an unincorporated assembly of people.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the wording I was looking at, it just says you must be a local nonprofit or government entity.
And I think that will capture, so Habitat is as my understanding, is a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So we would be giving the money to Habitat, depending on how the application is submitted. Habitat might say, here's what we're gonna do with the money. We're gonna give it to the lending library, and we're gonna basically guarantee that they do all the things right, all the terms and conditions of the money, so that we're funding the lending library. It just has to be given, or the agreement has to be with Habitat.
Okay. And this is kind of in the weeds question. I'm
Yeah.
not as familiar with
Yeah.
this, but I usually associate nonprofit with 501c3 specifically. And I've sometimes heard people use the term not for profits instead of nonprofits. Is that a
We're using them synonymously. The 501s, and I'm not a tax lawyer, so I don't know with enough specificity all the sub C3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that might be eligible.
Yeah.
The idea is not to just say 501c3. There may be others. We'll look at that. We're not going to disqualify somebody just because they're not C3, but we're not going to give it for example, a nonprofit that's a political organization that's there to advocate for a particular party.
Okay. Can I ask one last question on this?
Yeah, that's why we're doing it.
So if an individual has an idea that would accomplish one of the CCAP actions and they want to apply for this grant program, but they don't have any entity right now, they're basically not eligible.
We've decided that that's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, appreciate the questions though, because I think because this is the first year, we're definitely learning through like how to word things and how we're like portraying the information to community members. So we'll definitely make note of this and like make it more clear for next year. So thank you.
Yeah. Could I add one last thing on that, Megan?
Yeah, I can
Especially
try to.
since you're getting all the input on this, if you do receive a lot of community members who are, I don't know how much this is like an edge case or if there's actual lot of people interested who might not be eligible because of that.
Yeah.
But if you do get that, would you be able to share that with the committee just so we have an idea if changes like we would want to consider changes in the future?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on. I'm wondering, I think maybe since the sandwiches are here, we can take a quick break and get those now. Does that sound okay? Or do people want to do the next agenda item before we get lunch? I know it's a little early.
How much time do you think we'll spend on are you going to try to go quick, or are we going to get into some details on the fee?
It should be quick. I just don't know how long the question and discussion part of it will be.
Maybe we should get sandwiches.
I think we should get sandwiches. Okay, so let's break for like 5 to 7 minutes, and everyone can get a sandwich, and then I'll be presenting a couple slides of information so you can continue eating your sandwich while I do that. And for new members, we do provide lunch every meeting. So this is also for everyone else. This is the first time that we're straying from plankers in 5 years. So we have to be kept
That
out.
is, I'm not had a lunch, that's not Snickers.
I know. So you can give us feedback after the meeting. Other ideas of other lunch places. Okay.
They said about this right here.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So I am gonna share an update about our electrification fee and incentives update, and apologies that we've been fluctuating with the name of what we call this, but right now it's the electrification fee and incentives update. The name of the policy initiative. So I just have a couple of slides, really high level. My purpose for today is not for us to get into a substantive discussion about the electrification fee, but to just give you all an update of where that initiative stands, what the next steps are, and what we anticipate doing that deeper dive into this fall in the joint committee. So I have first just a timeline, and for the benefit of our new members, I'm going to start at sort of the beginning. So sharing some of the work that the committee's done to date, and then switching to what the next steps are. So I think most of our new committee members might be relatively familiar with the work we've doing, but basically over the last year or so, as part of our last council goals, our council directed us that they were really interested in us exploring ways to encourage buildings in Bend to reduce their use of natural gas and to electrify instead. So about a year ago, we launched a process where we were just trying to investigate the different policy options, the different levers that we have to try to drive that transition to electrification. So we did kind of a broad policy review, and then the council asked the ECC to kind of synthesize the information that staff presented to them. We had a consultant supporting that, and to share a recommendation with the council about which of those policies they felt like the city should really invest in moving forward. So the ECC delivered a recommendation in December. There's a 1 to 2 page letter that you could go back to look at all the nuances of the ECC's recommendation, but the big picture recommendation from that was that they felt that the council should really strongly restrict natural gas in new construction, since it's easiest to electrify for new construction. And so the levers that the committee recommended we pursue is to restrict new gas in the right of way, to pursue regulating NOx emissions, which is an air quality regulation, which is a way that some entities in other parts of the country are using that kind of regulation to really limit the use of natural gas appliances. So those were kind of the top 2 priorities from the committee. A backup priority was that if those were not possible, or the council wasn't interested in those at this time, that they would recommend pursuing a fee on natural gas appliances. And then another big part of the recommendation was that so that was kind of the new construction part. And then for existing buildings, to create incentives to help existing buildings convert to electrification, since it's much more expensive for existing buildings. So the council heard that recommendation in December. They had a lot of community input from a lot of different sectors of the community at that time, many with concerns about those recommendations. Some questions, some of the stronger regulatory recommendations, there were then and remain just a lot of question marks about them, since they have not really been enacted widely in the rest of the country. So the council wanted us to go engage with 2 other of the city's advisory committees, the Bend Economic Development Advisory Board and the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. So we did that in February, and we got further feedback from those committees at that time. We had introduced a staff proposal to that committee, which was that the staff proposal was that we really start with incentives because of the high degree of uncertainty with the right-of-way restriction and the NOx regulation, so that we should really focus on incentives that could include the fee, and we kind of do a process where we would investigate the fee, also investigate other incentive options, and try to just focus on that for both new and existing buildings. So that was kind of what we talked about with this joint committee in February. And then that joint committee generally supported that, but there were some differing opinions because the joint committee was beat up AHAC and the ECC. And So then in April, we went to the council, we shared that same recommendation. And the ECC at that time kind of sent an additional letter to the council, really encouraging them to prioritize the fee. The way it had been proposed initially was that we would look at the fee, but that we may or may not pursue that. And the ECC recommendation in April to the council was like, do the fee. There's another city in Oregon has done this recently. We think that will move the most quickly if we, do the fee and then kind of create an incentive program based on that. So in April, the council agreed with that ECC recommendation, and that's the direction that they gave us. They do want us to create an disincentive package to encourage electrification, but they really want, they're very interested in pursuing the fee model. So we are now moving forward with that kind of framework that we will pursue the development of a fee on natural gas appliances. Presumably that may generate some form of revenue, and that we would use that revenue to then create an incentive program. So that's the scope that we're working on now, and that's just kind of the backstory of how we got there. So then after that council direction in April, on the staff level, we've just been trying to do more research into the fee. There's one example that the city of Ashland in Oregon adopted a fee earlier this year. It's not in effect yet. So that's the model that gets cited the most frequently. There are a couple of other models in the country, not very many, and they're all a little bit different. But we've just been doing research on all of them to try to wrap our heads around how you can approach that. There's the Ashland model, but are there lessons learned from the other models where we might want to kind of, we want to create a Bend version of this fee, not just exactly copy something another city has done. So we've been spending the summer really trying to do a deep dive in that, and then even understand the process of how we would move forward about and create a fee. Because different cities take dramatically different approaches to how they develop a fee too. So where we're at now, August 2025, is that I am going to go to a council work session next week on Wednesday, and I'm going to share out with them some of the findings of that research that I've done. We also have a little bit of, we've got some permit data from our own permit system that sheds light into how many, what buildings are doing today and what they've been doing over the last couple of years. So how many are using gas versus all electric. So we'll share some of that. And then I'll be sharing with them some of my key takeaways and proposed next steps. And the rest of this timeline are the proposed next steps that I'll be sharing with the council. So assuming that they are comfortable with this approach, what our next steps are is that we're currently in the process of procuring consultant support for the fee and incentive development. So as we looked into it, we really feel, and I have my next slide kind of goes into the things that the type of analysis that we need support on. But in order to develop that fee, we are going to need good data, good findings to help us justify that fee, to help us facilitate a discussion about what do we really want that fee to accomplish and what are the different factors that we want to go into how that fee is calculated. So we think we need consultant support for that. That's a little bit different of a skill set than we had with the consultant that we already had on board for the previous session. So we actually have that RFP is already out. So that process is underway. And then the goal is to get a consultant on board. And then we have another council meeting scheduled on October 22nd, where with the help of that consultant, we will have some additional analysis to present to them and get some final scoping questions that we need from the council level before we can go and do public engagement, because there are certain things that we really need the council to just set the direction and the stage from a big picture about, like, what is their ultimate goal, and what pieces of it do we want the community to inform versus what are sort of the non-negotiables from their perspective about the overarching initiative. So in October, we hope to kind of get a really final scope and direction from the council on the scope of the fee and also the public engagement process. And then at that time, we'll be launching a public engagement process to get input to define the fee. that we envision happening with the same joint committee that we convened back in February. So a combination of AHAC, BDAB, and the ECC. Again, these are steps that we're going to confirm next week. We're going to confirm with the council that they're comfortable with this process moving forward. So there's an opportunity for it to change until we have that meeting. But it would be a joint committee of those three committees. We will be building in roles for the three utilities, including Cascade Natural Gas, Pacific Power, and Central Electric Co-op. We're envisioning this to be an ex officio role because they have expressed a lot of interest in just, at the very least, being able to provide just good information and just kind of a continuing ability for them to kind of track what's going on, provide information that they think will inform the committee. And then we also envision probably some additional kind of one-time engagements at specific points with the developer builder kind of trades industry, the people that are going to be sort of the most directly impacted by the fee. And so that format might look something like a roundtable. We did roundtables when we were designing the transportation utility fee, and that model worked really well. So all of that whole public engagement process will start in November. And then that's going to be, there's going to be a lot of engagement happening. So I expect that to get to the point where we're proposing to the council, this is what the fee should look like. I'm expecting that to take through the winter until about March. These are where the timelines sometimes are pretty speculative because those public engagement processes can sometimes introduce other things that just change the timeline. So I think we would propose the fee around March. And then my thinking is that the incentive program would probably come after the fee because we could use the definition of the fee will help us understand, is there going to be revenue projected? How much will that be? Which will be crucial information for defining the incentive program. So that's how I envision it taking place. And then my last slide is just, these are the type of things that I think when I talk about that public engagement process, these are the type of questions we need to answer for ourselves in order to get to the ultimate incentive package. So the first big picture question is, what is the ultimate goal of the fee? And two ways you can look at it is, are you trying to really drive behavior change or are you trying to raise revenue? And while it may not be only one or the other of those, but there's a little bit of digging we need to do to figure out like, what do we really want? Because if if you're really driving behavior change in the most successful form of that, you would have no revenue to create an incentive program. For new committee members, old committee members know this well, is that we're very resource limited at the city. Anytime we want to do a new program, we do typically need to find some sort of revenue to create that program. So that's kind of a big picture question that we'll be talking with the council about, hopefully when we go to them in October, providing some analysis for them to help give them good information to help make that decision. And then we also just need to define what factors should be included in our fee and then define them. So if you take the Ashland example, they have a calculation and it takes into account the social cost of carbon, an average emissions factor per appliance. And it's the same average for every single home, every single dwelling unit in Ashland, regardless of dwelling type, regardless of size of home, and then the service life. So those are the three things. That's how they calculate their fee. So a question for us is, are those the same three things we want to calculate, or are there other things that we would want to include in our fee calculation to kind of right size it for Bend? So some of the factors that we may include is, like Ashland, you could do the social cost of carbon, you could do appliance specific emissions factor. Ashland's is really based on specific appliances. You could try to incorporate something like the size of the home or something about the actual climate impact of the home, because that's something that I don't see in Ashland's. If it's a 5,000 square foot house or a 1,200 square foot apartment, it's the same fee. So those are the types of questions we want to ask for ourselves. Some of the other models I looked at, like in the city of Burlington and the city of Breckenridge and some other Colorado mountain towns, they have a different kind of fee, but it's similar. They set their fee based on the market cost to electrify rather than the social cost of carbon, so that it's driving the disincentive based on the true market costs. So again, we have to kind of first figure out which of those factors matter to us. That will be informed in part by this, what is the ultimate goal of the fee? What are you trying to do? And then we need to come up with calculations and data to justify what those values are. So those are the things we'll be using the consultant for, but also getting feedback from that joint committee to shape. And then the last important piece is defining the incentive. So what do we want to incentivize? You know, assuming we have a pool of funds, what do we want to incentivize? Depending on it, we may have scope to look at non-financial incentives as part of that to recommend to council as like a future phase, and then defining how the incentive should be implemented, because sometimes just the process of the incentive itself can be really impactful in terms of how effective it is. So this is still, in my mind, if you can't tell, it's still a pretty like generalized list of problems we have to solve. It's one of the reasons that we're procuring a consultant to help give us a framework to get through all of these things. But I also share it with you, and it's what I'll share with council next week to highlight for us. If we want to go down this road, we do have to answer all these questions for ourselves. And the city of Ashland did this. They answered these questions for themselves. And so, we have to go through that process. So that's what we're going to be working on this fall. And I'll take any questions about it. And then we don't have to figure it out today. We could maybe come back to it at the next meeting, but my goal is to have 3 committee members participate on that joint committee. We had 3 at the February meeting. So I'd like to get those 3 members appointed, and the 3 that did the February meeting, if we want it to be the same 3, that's great. It doesn't have to be. We didn't ask those people in February if they were ready to commit to a longer process, because this would be probably at least an additional monthly meeting for at least the winter months, and basically along for the ride, however it evolves. So that's what I have on that topic. Do we have questions about it?
Could I ask a very quick question on the last piece first?
Yeah.
On the 3 members, would it be helpful, just to guide that question, would it be helpful for folks who had been on that first meeting to have that context and like that discussion understanding for the next meeting? For the next phase of this?
Have a discussion. What do you mean?
So the folks who were on this in the February meeting,
Yeah.
Would that context and having been part of that be helpful to continue to bring that to?
I think it would be helpful. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, particularly for our group. For the other committees, it will probably be helpful for them because they're not also spending a lot of their time. Our group's been closer to it because it's ultimately a climate project. So I think it's of course helpful, but I don't think it's mandatory.
Agreed. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm the only one who is here today and was there then, and yeah, that context is helpful, but it's not critical.
Yeah, it was Ray, Nick, and Neil. So we don't need to decide that today, especially with Nick and Neil not being here. But something for you all to think about. I can check in with the 3 members that were on the joint committee and gauge their level of interest. But if any of you know up front, you're like, I really, really want to be involved in this, it'd be great to just let me know. You can raise your hand now if you feel that way, or if you just want to let me know after the meeting. That way I can just kind of figure out if it's going to be something where we have more people than we have spots for.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what being on a joint committee entails and like the time commitment, or is there?
I think it'll be, it will look a lot like this. And it works really similar to our regular committee meetings. It would probably be an additional meeting every month, and I would guess it's like a 2-hour meeting. So I think that would be the minimum commitment for at least the months of like November through May.
And it's
But-
just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the side note I made is that sometimes when we do policy projects like this, especially if they can be more controversial, the process can evolve a lot. Like Covey knows, he was on our tree code committee, and I think it was originally scoped to be like 4 meetings over 4 months or something, and it ended up being like a year, right? It evolved a lot. So that's just something for anyone who signs up to just be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it just diving deeper into the electrification project?
Yeah, it'll be like all these questions. So basically, unless council directs us otherwise, they're going to be looking for a recommendation from that joint committee about what should this fee look like and what should the incentive package look like. So a lot of times they ask the ECC those types of questions. We want you to deliver a policy recommendation, and we work through that stuff here. In this case, based on the direction we got last year, we're proposing that policy recommendation comes from that group instead. So they will be the ones, like these questions, we won't necessarily be doing a deep dive in ECC meetings for. I can give updates at each meeting so everyone's kind of informed, and you guys can share your input with the members who are serving on that joint committee. But it will be that body that needs to come to agreement, and it will be interesting and different than with this group because the Economic Development Advisory Board and the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, everyone's just got sort of different priorities and different ultimate policy goals. So I would expect there to be a wider difference in opinion and where we should land. And so the role of the committee members here, is going to be engaging in that kind of really dynamic discussion.
Okay. I'm interested in being a part of it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I also had I don't know if it's a question or a comment or just something to put out there, but coming from the Bay Area where they did impose bans, which are obviously more restrictive than this, and then saw quite a bit of legal pushback.
Yeah.
I'm just curious in the research into this type of framework, did you see any like legal challenges or how are we going to try to address that? Like, beat them before they happen with how we write it. And I know obviously a lot of community engagement hopefully helps.
Yeah, it's
stop
definitely
that,
top
but-
of mind, and I might ask Michael if you want, so it's something we talked about a lot
Okay.
in the first, that first phase. It's one of the reasons that staff ultimately recommended to council we don't pursue the right-of-way ban or the NOx regulation. Even with the fee, it's still a consideration. I don't know if you have just like a general response
Not that
to
much
that.
to add, really. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
We're tracking all of this, including the lawsuit, down in the Bay Area. There are a lot, and it's moving quickly, and things are uncertain. So we're trying to track it in real time as we can and give good advice to you all, staff clients and council clients, so that as we're working through this process, you all have the best legal information you can to make good decisions. But that's one of the things that makes this difficult, is things are moving quickly in real time.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're tracking it.
And the fee option seems to be workable.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons that it is the pathway moving forward, but part of that will depend on how it's done. So it'll, and like Michael said, there's no like, it's not black and white at all. And ultimately certain things come down to risk tolerance and things like that. So that will, it'll be a really big part of the discussion. Yeah.
Is all of the previous materials for meetings of this committee are online, correct? Because it might, especially Amy and Robin, if you're interested in this, it might be worth looking at some of the materials and conversations, especially the matrix that we had of the electrification options. That would have been in meeting materials at some point, right?
Yes, and I can send it to new members just so it's all in one place. I'll send you like the kind of main deliverables we have from that. We have a report, and then that's pretty easy to read. And then the ECC's recommendation letter, and I'll see if we had a bunch of stakeholder meetings too, so I can send you all that, because definitely, especially if you want to participate in the joint committee, it'd be good to get up to speed.
Some of the pros and cons on those legal dimensions were included on those other options. And
Yeah.
that was, that was I think probably the most heated part of the question, because there's certainly debate over how much legal risk is there and how willing should the city be to take on that kind of risk, thinking about it in terms of opportunity costs and overall benefits and resources.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just a background clarification on the fee. So right now, minus the details, It would be applied to the developer to incentivize all electric.
It would be the concept most likely is that it would be a permit fee. So if you applied for a permit and it had gas, there would be like a fee associated to that. So the developer would pay it, but depending on, is that who you're asking, like who pays it?
Yep.
I think depending on, the project, like some of those costs, if it's like a custom home, you know, the homeowner pays, you know, immediately in the next invoice. If it's like a larger subdivision, then it would be, yeah, as part of the development costs for the larger subdivision, and then, you know, they would decide ultimately how,
And
what
the
extent
meeting
to
would
pass it down.
be same time of day or at night or?
It would probably be scheduled at a different time, and for the ad hoc ones that we will generally do like a doodle poll of some kind for that once we have the members assigned, or, well, I'll have to think about that. I've heard that, I've heard from some of the other committees, it's helpful for us to just decide up front, this is the time it will be, so that people can decide to opt in, because it is so hard, like, for 9 people plus the staff to find a time that works for everyone, so I'll have to think about that. But it won't be at this exact same time.
I was pretty centrally involved in the gas ban in San Jose, so I'd be interested if there's room.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
And we usually have conversations during the committee meetings as well, so other committee members can provide input, and there's always room to
Yeah.
have those conversations.
Yeah, I haven't thought too much about that part of it, but I do anticipate, you know, because we do want the members that are in the joint committee to be, the idea is that they're reflecting, you know, the thoughts of their committee. I'm not sure how we facilitate that for all 3 committees in an efficient way, but that's something for staff to figure out. So I'll think about that a little bit. But yeah, I expect that you all would be getting updates so that you can share your input with those committee members to the extent that that works.
Cassie, I'd be potentially interested if
Okay.
timing works.
Well, the whole committee.
And or if there's engagement with developers, that would be maybe another avenue where.
Cool, yeah.
I'm interested.
Okay.
Additional question on that. Will there be space or opportunities for like adjacent conversations about how the city could make electrification easier? Like, so if they're going for a fee, is there a side conversation about other policies that could make that easier? For example, we build all electric, when we're building all electric with heat pumps, currently we have to do cadet heaters. That's per city code is my understanding. Someone can
I think it's statewide.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're really inefficient, it's silly, heat pump technologies come on way.
Yeah.
Folks have gotten exemptions that I know of.
Yeah.
So is that like that kind of thing? Like, is that a cost that the city could figure out ways to like maybe eliminate that cost that can make electrification easier? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'll have to think about the reason I don't have anything like that necessarily planned as part of the process, partially because the whole point of going through the big scan and narrowing is to focus us on doing one thing at a time or 2 things at a time. If there are relatively like specific things that are something we could talk about, that's not like a whole side initiative. I'll think about how and when to bring that up. That specific issue I will look into more because it has come up very recently. I just reviewed, like, I saw there's like a form related to that basically that says if you put in a mini split, you must have another backup heat, and it like needs to be a resistance heat. And interestingly, or doesn't it, a resistance heat or a few other options. Interestingly, when I talked with the city of Burlington, who has a similar fee, they do not allow resistance heat as a primary heating source anyway, because I do think that that's one thing for us to think about, for the joint committee to think about with our existing building code. If it's just you have to electrify and it's not specific about the type of electrification, you could be inadvertently driving a lot of new construction to be just installing a bunch of resistance heat, which is very inefficient. That would not be the desired outcome. So it's another thing with the fee. The other thing I didn't add in the scope is like exemptions, like other types of policy, like guidance for that, the fee and who it applies to and that kind of thing. So that'll be something like in Burlington, it was covered. They're like resistance heat cannot be a primary energy source. And so I talked with our building code people to figure out, I'm like, is that true here? And they're like, no, it's the opposite kind of. So yeah, something that I'll look into that one specifically. I'll think about if there's other types where, how and where we'll get like other space. Yeah.
Just one thought on that, if it is a state code issue, I'm assuming they have like opportunities for public feedback on the next cycle of the code. Like
Yeah.
what we do in California.
Yeah.
And that could be a
Yeah.
good avenue for advocacy from this
Yeah.
group of if we have specifics like that, they're like, hey,
Yeah.
generally as a state, we're aligned on this, but you have this thing in the state code that's
Yeah.
making it really difficult.
That's
you know,
really true.
That could be a
Yeah.
very targeted but good use of time.
Yep, definitely. Does that answer your question, Scott?
Yeah.
Cool.
I had a scoping question also, and I'm not gonna volunteer for the subcommittee, especially because it overlaps with legislative session. But so my recollection of the conversation where we kind of landed on the stronger direction around pursuing a fee is that it's fairly narrow, like what the scope of the investigation, and limited to something similar to the Ashland initiative and like fee based. And so I'm just want to confirm that it is specific to sort of fees to disincentivize gas appliance use, as opposed to a broader raising revenue through other mechanisms.
Yes.
Conversation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I think if through this process, we come to the conclusion that this fee will not raise any or much revenue, there may be a follow-on discussion for the council to say, are you still interested in also incentivizing? If that's a financial incentive, revenue will be needed. So I expect those are some of the questions where I expect it to be like a little bit of we can kind of define the scope now, but I think the scope is going to evolve a little bit depending on the decisions that are made.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because the other cities that have these fees are not really generating revenue from them because Ashland, we don't know yet. But they also have really low volumes of people using gas today. And then in Burlington and some of those mountain towns, people comply with the regulation or with the alternative. Yeah.
I was gonna ask if there was any input from council or otherwise on that incentive element, if similar to how Laura was asking the scope of the fee analysis, if there's similar constraints on the scope of the incentive part for the revenue use, or if that's still kind of open-ended.
It's open-ended. We haven't really had much discussion about that. What are like a range of things you're thinking about?
Well, I know that Ray has raised interesting points about the inefficiency in some context of this kind of strategy and thinking about being able to use those funds then for the most efficient in terms of sort of the lowest cost or burden approaches to mitigation or offset or avoidance.
Yeah, we have not had any council direction. I think that's where the hope is that we can be providing them good information and recommendations with the help of the consultant, and then also input. That part would probably be like consultant analysis, but then also input from the joint committee. Yeah.
So that's still a little more open-ended.
Yeah, definitely.
Questions?
No, I don't need huge. I mean, I think there's just a lot of scoping to do, right? These are real foundational things. And so I think it'll be really profitable to do this work. And I do a lot of this incentive design stuff, navigating these trade-offs in my day job, and I would be psyched to stay on the joint committee and contribute.
Can I ask, in terms of that joint committee, when you had it, how much direct pushback was there from the other committees in terms of against the fee overall? Versus trying to find a way that a fee can be designed that's compatible.
Well, it was less about the fee. So I guess for the benefit of folks, and Cassie or anyone can add, I mean, my experience was we had a joint committee. It went basically how I thought it would go. right? Because I'd been at a couple of ECC meetings and it'd be like, oh, let's regulate and let's do the right of way thing and the Knox thing. And then the staff presented at that meeting for the first time a more incremental approach involving incentivization rather than fees. And to generalize, you had sort of the development committee folks talking about, hey, this is really, really expensive, you know, and you need to be aware of that. And it doesn't seem like you've considered that. And you had Neil was most vocal ECC member there, and he was basically saying, no, it's actually less expensive, and you know, it had some examples. And there was just kind of back and forth, and it became clear there was kind of a disagreement on facts, probably also evidencing a disagreement on, you know, priorities. But you know, and then I actually thought the staff recommendation was great. I think I reported back as much, that it was a pragmatic approach, which I liked. But yeah, so it went about how I thought it would in terms of like, yeah, there were diversity of opinions, and the opinions kind of fell. Everyone was wearing the hat that you think they would be wearing and making the comments that you would expect, basically.
And we didn't, it was partially because we did not, the staff recommendation was not like, we recommend a fee. The staff recommendation was that we should look at incentives that can include disincentives as part of that. So we had left it quite open-ended. So they were, the other committees were comfortable with like, yeah, we can explore these things. We understand the exploration is going to include exploring a fee. So there were a subtle shift in April when the council told us like, we do want you to pursue the fee as opposed. So that does kind of fundamentally change how we're approaching this fall process, where we may have started it, been like, hey, joint committee, here's a bunch of incentive, you know, here's 6 different pathways we could go. One of them is a fee. Which of these pathways should we continue going down? And the fee could have been abandoned by the joint committee early on there. At least BDAB, I can't remember AHAC, but at least BDAB submitted more formal statements. And I do not remember their specific language, but they were pretty clear about wanting to avoid regulations and fees in general and to focus on incentives. So we did not have the discussion so specifically about like the fee itself, because that direction came a little bit later.
So Mark, questions like, are we trying to raise revenue or change behavior? Did not come up.
Right, yeah.
Or like, when we think about impact in Bend, what are we talking about? How do you even, you know, what's the conceptual framework on that? Wasn't there. What kind of bill impact are we willing to tolerate in exchange for a given amount of carbon reduction? Not discussed, right? So I mean, there's just a lot of foundational things that I think the consultant will probably grapple with, and then the committees will.
And part of my question is also leading towards if we should be more proactive in terms of coordination or communication with the other committees. I know that the start of this year, when we had representatives from all the committees together and some of the council goal setting conversations, there was this interest, sort of broad interest in more cross-committee communication, or at least awareness. And like, for example, having committee chairs get together occasionally, or at least, you know, sit in on meetings. And, you know, maybe we'd invite BDAB or the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee staff to come, or members or chair to come here, or I should go, or anyone could go to those others. I don't know if there's been any more conversation about that, but this feels like one where, you know, at least getting an understanding of where things are starting, but maybe that's also a staff coordination thing too.
Yeah, I remember what you're like after that January meeting. I don't know if there's been discussion. I'll think about it a little bit. I'd want to make sure, I think it's a good idea. I want to make sure we're not like creating some of the public meeting issues by having different committees get together and talk about things that are sort of substantively related to the work. But yeah, I can continue to think about a good way to continue facilitating that. We have not had like citywide discussions in follow-up from that meeting that I'm aware of, but there could be other people working on that.
Mark, whatever the process is, I mean, I think it's the point well taken, right? There are some trade-offs and compromises that seem like they're obviously going to need to occur in developing this. And so figuring out how to do that as efficiently as possible is probably appropriate.
Yeah, because it can be difficult in these meetings. I'll kind of speaking to foreshadowing on the Invest Bend front, to really accomplish a lot during the meetings when you have a lot of people and if they are very different perspectives, and coming up with a mechanism to actually lead towards discrete decisions or outcomes from that can be a bit challenging. If you have sort of the ground rules set ahead of time, it feels like it might be more productive.
It's a shared vision of some sort. I mean, if you end up with super polarized,
Yep.
everyone walks in and you know, they're polar opposites. Like, okay, what do we do about this?
So I guess a process question, and I saw there were raised hands. Are
Yeah, those were members of the public, which
Okay.
we don't we can't take
No,
comments
but-
outside of public comment from members of the public, yeah.
Okay. So in terms of answering these scoping questions, I kind of lost track of the timeline and who is answering these questions. Is this sort of ECC, the joint committee, staff with the consultant? Like what's the order of operations of who's addressing these questions?
It's mainly gonna be the joint committee. There may be pieces of it, like I think that top line question, that we have the council answer for us to scope it a little bit, and that's what we hope to talk with them about at their October meeting, once we've brought the consultant on board. Cause the idea is, yeah, there's a lot of different pieces here, and like what needs to be answered first, what's answered later are things that I'm hoping I can get some support with by a consultant who knows how to develop these fees and knows what a good process is. So I think some of these things will be answered by the council first. Some of the things the council will say, this is where we want the committee to tell us that. So like an example could be that the council says, the ultimate goal is this part of it. And how that comes together, what factors you include to get to that, we want a recommendation from the joint committee on. And then the joint committee, though, will be informed by a technical consultant and staff together who are providing them good data to answer those questions thoughtfully. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have two quick things. And thanks for sharing some of the past meeting, since you're part of that, Ray. I just wanted to add, I think my recollection from the report out also from Neil, since he's not here today, was feeling a little, I don't know if this is the right term, and I don't want to put these words in his mouth, so I don't know if he used these terms, but kind of blindsided a little bit in terms of how the first meeting went, and how there was a little bit more staff direction that came there that hadn't been discussed until that point by ECC or any other committee.
Yeah.
And then I think that's where that second discussion that we had as a committee, where we decided to write the letter, came from, I think, a little bit. So I'm really glad to see there's a lot of new member interest in joining that joint committee. And I think the only thing I would add to what Mark suggested in terms of those resources is, well, one is like the joint committee will also have meeting minutes and like the whole recording that would be viewable if people really wanted to get like firsthand see what was discussed. And then also that meeting where we decided to write the letter, which was a fairly short discussion at the end of another of a meeting. But then how that letter came about might be also just helpful context for folks who are new getting into that discussion.
Yeah, when I send those deliverables, I can send, I can even send them to the whole committee so that like everyone kind of has an info in one spot, but I could link to the specific meetings, the joint committee meeting, and then if that April one would be helpful too, where you all decided to write the letter.
Awesome, thanks, Cassie. And the last quick point I want to make is something I appreciate welcoming the new members, and I just wanted to mention that when I first joined the committee, I feel like there's a lot of acronyms and jargon that we've just gotten used to, and I think for the most part, people have been really good with like recognizing those with BDAP and AHAC and all, like there's a lot of acronyms, so just being like mindful of that, or if there are questions, it's definitely asking them, because I knew I had a lot of questions when I first started, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Cody, I'll just say your characterization of what I think Neil's reaction was, if I can take the liberty, I think it was accurate. And I think it came down to the ECC, before I was on the ECC, had made that December recommendation that was more like do some regulatory stuff. And the staff recommendation basically was like, well, we'd rather do this voluntary incentive-based stuff. And yeah, I think Neil felt like, hey, you're not following our recommendation. He may have even said that. And I was the new guy, so I was like, yeah, of course there's gonna be compromise. This seems exactly what I would have expected. So that, I'll just add that context.
I don't again, question, comment, but just thinking of what you mentioned, Ray, about the like different basis of fact around cost. I'm wondering, and I don't know if it's appropriate in the scope for the consultant, but I'm wondering if there's some aspect of that, like
Yes.
market research. I know you mentioned market cost to electrify,
Yeah.
but that's like even a separate thing of just like, here is our shared foundation of
Yeah.
truth to inform this discussion.
Yes.
That's helpful.
No, I'm glad you asked, actually. I noticed that I didn't include it in this
Okay.
slide, but that is part of the analysis we expect. I
Okay.
think it would come naturally as a
Yes,
function
agree.
of doing this stuff anyway,
Mhm.
which is one of the reasons I haven't like separated it as a thing. But the idea is that we will have, you know, numbers informed by data where we
Yeah.
can say, this is how much it costs
Yeah.
to do this in Bend. And, you know, we'll need it even to define the incentive appropriately
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
it's fundamental information that should make the conversation a little bit easier to navigate. Because there's just differing reports out there, differing real experiences. I think because electrifying is very case by case basis situation. The other part of that is trying to understand the operational costs, the long-term costs, because there's differing opinions, experiences, and whether switching from gas to a heat pump dramatically decreases your bill or if it actually increases your bill. So we need to get information that can, you know, can work as the basis of ours in our decisions.
Yep, and that came up at the meeting, was like, hey, we need recent local accurate data that we can all agree on, because there was not agreement.
Yeah, costs are so hard to like define what's the cost, so that was part of the decision not to like do that analysis separately up front, because rooting it in what we're trying to accomplish with the fee will help us like define those costs in the most helpful way too. Makes sense. Okay, are we ready to move on from this topic?
All right.
So I can give another update next month because we'll have gone to the council, and I know it will continue to be a topic of interest.
Okay, so we'll move on to investment. I'm gonna give a little update on this. For those of you who are new to the committee, we've had a few presentations about some of the efforts by the city in terms of urban renewal and ultimately economic development. And part of that process has been now the establishment in terms of council goals and directive to create the first economic development strategic plan for Bend. It's a little incredible that haven't had something explicitly like that, although a lot of those elements generally show up in the comprehensive plan and growth planning process. But this has been a deliberate effort to think about what economic growth for Bend means and how to use those forces of economic growth for as beneficial of outcomes as possible. So what has been underway so far is a series of, I guess we're calling them focus groups. It's not technically a committee, but representatives from, I'm the representative from the ECC. We have representatives from the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee and from BDAB, as well as other city staff representatives and private sector, both nonprofit and for-profit representatives, developers, the hospital, the airport, things like that. And it's generally all driving towards a plan, the draft of which should be out. Maybe I get into that a little bit. Okay, yeah, draft in September for council approval in December. Councilor Platt has been participating in the meetings as well, and the council seems very interested and engaged on this process. And I think this first set of meetings, which was originally going to be 3 and now is going to be 4, is generally input for a relatively high level visioning document. It's not exactly clear what that will include, but as opposed to having very precise directives and objectives and even policies, it feels relatively high level. Most of what we're doing is talking about visioning, like I'll get to some of that on the later slides. But there are other more technical products that the city has been producing, city staff have been producing, that should be out any day now, from my understanding, or somewhat soon. There's a state of housing, state of the economy, and industry cluster reports that are collectively designed to help inform some of the strategy. The city has also recently hired and created a new position at a high level to lead economic development. Katie Brooks, who had been the head of the Bend Chamber of Commerce, has that role. So there is a relatively strong private sector, business-oriented perspective on this. We could maybe go to the next slide. So the kinds of topics we've been talking about, several that are very relevant to the ECC, I'd say, in terms of thinking about how economic investment relates to quality of life, and environmental sustainability and equity are key components of this. Quite a bit of the conversation has been, how do we think about economic growth in a way that can lead to positive outcomes and sustain the quality of the experience of Bend for residents and visitors alike, and avoiding sort of unsustainable impacts on natural resources and the like. So it's been very data driven in terms of intent. Jonathan Taylor, if you remember, who has spoken to us before, he's very focused on bringing a lot of data to this process. So is Cyrus. And so ultimately it's been conversations during these, I guess we've had 2 meetings from 2.5 hours, 3 hours in evenings. And I guess if we go to the next slide, there is a meeting Thursday, the 28th. As the representative, I will not be able to make that one. So if anyone from this committee would like to join that, they also tacked on an additional 4th meeting in September where we'll see the draft plan to be able to comment on it. So that's something we can talk about if anyone else would be interested. And again, ultimately, this doesn't feel like a sort of a strong policy product, as more as a high level characterization, although it'd be interesting to hear, Councilor Platt, if you have thoughts on that. But ultimately it will feed into the growth plan and the comprehensive plan as those are underway, which I'm not an expert on the overall planning process. I might be getting that wrong a little. I was asking about that, and it sounds like we might have Brian Rankin from the city, who lead planner, come to this committee potentially soon, something we'll talk about later, and he should be able to give us more insight in terms of how these pieces should fit together. Happy to talk about the content of the process, share meeting notes, and the like, or take feedback. But yeah, any general questions or any other comments anyone has on this that I might have missed?
Mark, there was another focus group meeting earlier in this, right? That
We've had
and so
2 so
you've been
far.
going to those focus groups.
Yeah, I've been to the first 2, and this 3rd one I can't make, and then there'll be a 4th one. And the first one was really high level, getting input from all of the representatives about what they see as objectives, how they think about growth, what are the pros, what are the cons, how do we organize ourselves and think about it. And then second one was a little more data driven in terms of what do we know about growth trajectories, housing affordability, factors for businesses in terms of attraction, retention. Frankly, things like fees and costs of doing business, cost of housing. One of the most common messages has been that one of the hardest things for businesses to grow and establish here is the cost of housing for workforce, and then also sort of workforce training, development, as well as attraction. So there are these sorts of components, and I'll say, again, as an economist and with my colleagues working on these issues in Portland, where there's been a lot of pushback and even some economic contraction, I think there are some important lessons regionally that we're all trying to think about. Yes, Councilor, did you have?
Councilor Platt.
Come
up to the microphone.
I think Mark's given a real true and accurate description of what's going on in those meetings. I think what I would offer to you from the council perspective, both on this effort and on the previous one, which I didn't say anything about the fees, is we in the council are trying very hard to get direction from the experts in the community, whether it's a fee, whether we're changing our carbon footprint, whether we're looking at the economic growth going towards the future, at what are the levers that we can pull locally, and what are the dangers and the challenges associated with doing so. So this process right now is good and well intentioned, and to my mind, a little high level. What I'm looking for and what I advocated strongly for in this last meeting was, now, thank you for all the expertise in this room. Now, can we get to really policy suggestions if we can? And because that's what I and the rest of the council wants to show is working government. What can we control that exists within our level of government below the state level? What can we do here locally? And that's the same thing with the fee. And the incentives associated with that is the go-do from the council is help us get an executable game plan for this. Let us know the pros and cons with us, and we'll take your best answer. And then we're going to try to do the hard work of deciding, educating the public, and then rolling it out and actually moving the needle measurably so that it applies to both of these areas. So that's what I have to offer.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments on this topic?
Or interest in, is that next Thursday, 2 Thursdays?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. Is anyone interested in attending 2 Thursdays from now in the evening?
You could probably talk about the climate fee there a little if you want.
Talk about it.
I'll be out of town, Mark. I would otherwise be happy to attend, but I'm.
I
not.
might be able to.
Yeah, I'm actually also out of town, so.
Yeah, I don't think it's critical that we have some.
Yeah, not since they're the fourth meeting. If it was the final meeting, it would be a bigger lost opportunity, but I think since there's that fourth meeting, you can join.
And I was gonna check with Cyrus and Jonathan, but I'm assuming once we get that draft plan that, maybe you'd be the one to do it, but hopefully we could distribute it to the whole committee. So if anyone has comments on it, they can provide them to me, or even you might get excited and want to come to the fourth meeting too.
Yeah, I'll check with Cyrus if he thinks that would be appropriate. For sure. If it's a public document, for sure, but if it's like a draft version that they haven't posted yet, I don't know, but yeah.
Two things. I mean, one, Mark, I'm curious your perception of like what are the opportunities for like the ECC voice to be heard in that space, or like are there specific topics where there seems like a real nexus to provide input that makes a difference? And then this is a little bit back to the last topic and off topic, but talking about lessons learned from Portland and this and fees and these broader conversations, I think with the changes in federal funding, fallout from the legislative session, and reduced state funding for a lot of the things in our broader climate action plan, I keep hearing about Portland Clean Energy Fund as one of the remaining sources of funding. And wouldn't it be great if other cities had such a thing? And so that's just, if we're thinking about what could be learned from that process, I think that's just something to keep in mind in our work.
No, I think that's a great point, and I don't think it's cut or dry by any means. For example, some of the conversation has even been how things like those fees are a signal for the identity and the kind of growth and the direction, and frankly, the mindset and the culture that you're joining if you come to Bend. And there are a lot of progressive people and businesses, and maybe more progressive businesses on climate tech that are looking for a community that's going to be supportive. So I don't think by any means there's a sentiment that any policy of that sort is necessarily bad for growth, and growth is the only thing that matters. So I think sustainability, quality of life, environmental quality, access to nature, support for these ethics are all part of it, and has been a strong part of the conversation so far. I think there's just a objective of doing that in a way that's compatible with the private sector as much as possible, and is hearing from the private sector on that. So I think there's a lot of room for ECC messaging, and ultimately what I expect to come out of this, kind of like what Councilor Platt's saying, we'd love to get to some specific policy objectives, but at a minimum, it seems we're coming up with some visioning language, so you can point to key terminology and concepts that then, as we evaluate policy in the future, we can say, okay, well, it's compatible with this economic development plan because it has these components or objectives.
And if I can just add to that, I think if I remember when this had been first presented to us, I think I brought up the concept of like degrowth, and I wasn't like very familiar with it, but I liked their answer. I felt like it was all about being intentional with how the growth is happening, and it sounds like that's still been part of the focus. So I'm glad to hear that piece of it. And then a quick side note is it seems like I can't make that meeting either, but if there's no one present right now who can make that meeting, but one of the 3 members who are absent are interested, maybe they could attend, if that's helpful, because it sounds like it's the last focus group meeting before the draft is created. So if that's helpful, we could still reach out to those 3 people and see if they want to.
That's a good point.
That's true.
I'm happy to reach out to Neil and Rory and
Nick.
And if they can't, let me know, because I know I'll be around.
Okay.
Yeah. I
There's
don't know
free
exactly.
food.
Well, in that case.
Now it changes it.
When I went, it was like nice food. Too.
Yeah,
Yeah. Nice.
Gotta sell it better. Start with that.
Laura, to your comment about, I think you brought up a couple good points about like, for example, like, should we be looking at revenue sources for climate work in general? And I think that, also just the things you brought up about, just the changing landscape. I mean, we're in a, dramatically just different time right now than we were a year ago. And across, yeah, right, across a number of fronts. And it kind of segues to my next topic. Well, the last agenda item is, I won't jump there quite yet, but we can hold space to like just talk about some of those things as a council, like revenue options, for example. The council has not directed us to look for revenue options, but that doesn't mean that the committee can't like explore things like that. So just, as you guys are thinking about that, like, hey, we need to stop and we need to pause and like reflect on a few things and how this all comes together. Do we need to change how we're doing work? I think one of the reasons we haven't done that a lot in the past is we typically have just like our ECC meetings are so full that we have not had time. And so when we have opportunities, and I'll do my own thinking about this, but would welcome input from you all when we have some of these like a little bit more flexible times, which I feel like we have this fall, since the fee is happening in a different process. If you guys have ideas on like discussions we should be having as a group, like throw them out there for sure. One fun fact about PSEFs, or the Portland Clean Energy Fund specifically, is that maybe you're familiar with this, but after Portland passed that, a state law did pass later that year that said no other cities can do that. So kind of a bummer. Yeah. It would take a lot of political will to get that done anyway, but that specific revenue option was taken off the table for others.
And, I think it'd be a really interesting conversation we might have thinking about agendas, because it's not even just looking for ways to generate a pool of funds, but how do you make these projects happen? And a lot of the cap and trade incentive design world of policy design started like 25 years ago, was looking at all of the other pathways you can get to that. So like public-private partnerships, competitions and prizes were a really hot thing for a while, because you could see how much was spent on the private side to get to an outcome that has a public objective. And basically backing out from sort of these objectives that have public and private costs, what is the most efficient way to see those actualized, and stacking and all sorts of things. So we might, it feels like a really important point if we're going to see a decline in federal funding, because I feel like last year we were talking a lot about making sure we go after all the grants we can get and getting the city to hire more grant writers and such. So
yeah, that was definitely the funding plan a year ago. Yeah.
Cassie, on the topic of, at some point future meeting, I mean, I think discussing the state, federal, sort of non-local policy changes, and I mean, everything, including like power rate changes and everything like that. Just have a refresh, because I think that, I mean, certainly I know a lot about a couple of those things and basically nothing about others. But it strikes me that the landscape's just changed super materially in ways that, pretty much require an update of strategy in my mind.
Definitely.
But getting everyone on the same page with like, hey, this is what's happening with federal incentives. This is what's happening with state revenue sources for whatever.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's something that, especially if we can kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like crowdsource that information amongst
I
us
feel like
because.
across the committee.
Right,
can
we do.
cover-
I mean, we have such an exceptional, like, all of you, just the expertise you all bring is like so much, and we don't often have time for you all to like share what you know with the committee. And a lot of these topics are things that some of you work so much more closely than I could ever hope to try to get up to speed on. So maybe I think that could be a good segue. Or does anyone have any final comments or questions on the invest spend plan? Because otherwise I would like to switch gears to like kind of programming out our next couple of meetings. Invest spend, anyone?
I'm pro investment.
Okay, let's move on then. So what we have so October, I think for now, we do need to hold for the grant program. For September, I have just that we can do 2 quick updates on the electrification fee and the grant program. Those can be short. The other idea, I put a question mark next to here. So basically for September and November, that's usually how far out we look. We're pretty flexible. The one topic that has come up a few times is the desire to have our growth management team come in and talk about their growth plan and kind of more broadly how our land use planning and our climate work intersects, particularly now that we're a few years into the implementation of the climate friendly and equitable communities rules, which has had a lot of changes for us. We need to be designated climate friendly areas. There's just with those new rules, there's like so much more intimate tie-in between our work and theirs that we don't always directly touch. So that's a topic that can kind of happen anytime. There's not something super time sensitive about that. The growth plan is a really, really long-term project, and there's nothing in the next year necessarily that you all would need to engage in. So that's a potential topic that I put it in September since we haven't had anything else, knowing that it's come up a few times. Or anything else. So we'll write down, are you writing these down, Megan? Can you write down the potential agenda item topics? So the one I've heard is we might want to, the one that you shared, Ray, might want to like frame a little bit more specifically, but like just a review of
The landscape.
policy
updates.
landscape at the federal and state level and how things have evolved, and just like an open discussion about that. So that's a topic. And if that's of interest soon, we can maybe take a few minutes to talk about what that would look like for us and who can contribute to that discussion. But first, I'm curious if other people have top of mind, like things you think we should be talking about. And new members, like, don't be shy. Like, what would be helpful for you as new members for us to revisit? And if it's something that the committee has revisited recently, then that's something we can meet separately on and I can get you up to speed. Or I bet in many cases it will be something that the whole committee is like, yeah, it'd be good to talk about that. Any thoughts?
I'll just say, just since I have to step out a few minutes early, I'm happy to contribute to policy update discussion.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that in
Cool.
the chair, vice chair.
Yeah,
We'll
perfect.
work that topic.
I feel like Rory had suggested the growth plan land
Yeah.
discussion piece, and I was really interested in that too.
That one, I mean, I wouldn't mind doing that one in September. I have to still talk with growth management, but assuming we can get them here because that one's been kind of floating there for like quite a while now. Are people open to that as our September?
Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hopefully he's available, but if not Brian, someone else on his team can do it. So we'll plan on that. Are there any other topics you all want to explore later this fall?
And I think the revenue generation piece is a good one to just keep our eye on and probably should come after that landscape review.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we want to do that kind of all at once or spread it out, but that has implications for, you know, how we're approaching other work, especially the electrification work. So I would think we'd want to do that sooner rather than later, but
well, maybe let's soft schedule that for November since we likely won't have room in October. It'll come quickly, I promise. And then that will give us some time in our chair vice chair meetings. We can maybe scope that out a little bit and maybe bring back some questions in the next month or two if we have some for the group. Does that sound appropriate. Cool. Bobby?
I just wanted to add, I feel like I brought this up quite a bit, but consumption-based emissions account for about half of our emissions, and I would love to at some point, I know it's really challenging and tricky, but I think there are some cities that are really doing a good job of that. And it could be later fall or in the winter, but I would love to and I'm happy to do some of this work of reaching out to some cities that have been able to push forward on addressing consumption-based emissions, but I'd love to, for us as a committee, kind of see what can we do to address some of that too.
I was gonna make a similar point that historically we've had subcommittees on different segments of the climate action plan, different action categories. And I know we're not really working on those right now, but making sure that we are still minding some of those other areas, especially if we'd gotten any directive from council on other categories that were priorities. I remember that we gave our recommendations, and I realize electrification is a very high priority for us right now, but I don't know if there is bandwidth to be thinking about other categories, but maybe that's what.
Yeah, we had, so I think the one kind of biggest gap from what the council has directed us to versus what we're actively working on is we had a really general recommendation that was like promote reuse. Kavi, can't remember if you remember the language better than I do. It was sort of general, like let's do something to promote waste prevention and reuse. So that's an area that we should delve into at some point. As far as the individual working groups, I've really tried to move us away from those because they're tricky to manage. And after experimenting with them for a couple of years, I do not think they ultimately really helped us move the ball faster. I think they, those of you who've been in the committee have heard me say this time and time again. It kind of scatterbrained us a little bit rather than having a few initiatives to really drive forward. And as a staff, that can be difficult to support. That's not to say though that I think one of the ways I've tried to encourage us to move some of these things forward before, and we've tried a few versions of this, and I don't think anything has really stuck. But if an individual committee member has something that they see staff not working on right now, they see it not programmed in, and they want it to come up, the best way to contribute is for that individual committee member to do some research on their own and request some agenda time and say, hey, I've done a lot of research. So for example, and I'm not trying to tell you how you need to do this, but say you talked to a bunch of other cities and you got some really good ideas about consumption-based emissions. Then you can say, I would like agenda time in December and I'm going to report out to the group, and that can get that ball rolling a little bit. I think before what happened is we had too many of those ideas around. The expectation is that staff could be following through each of those things, but there were just too many things at once. So that's the part that I'm trying to push back a little bit. So I think empowering committee members to do your own research, bring things up and move it forward. If it's something, but otherwise we really are trying to stick with, the council goals, what's been prioritized by the council. We've heard repeatedly from the council that the fee and the electrification stuff is priority number one. We're doing the grant program. That's been another long-term priority. So that's why it's not coming up right now. But I'm sensitive to the fact that we always have more things that we say we're going to do in a biennium than we get done. And I also don't want to let things just, continue to get kicked down the road. But this is where I think we hope that, committee members can support in that way if you have the bandwidth to yourselves.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, it does feel like those committees were a way to get the broader committee to divide up some homework and do some background research. And maybe that's an easier way to do it rather than trying to have meetings on it if you have those topics that I guess you can voluntarily take on yourself. But if we have other areas, maybe also that legislative update would be another where we can kind of assign people who are interested to do some homework or talk to some other experts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I know we've had discussions about this too, so I think I understand the change in terms of using our limited time and resources and attention to have the most impact. So I think that's fine. I would love to request time in November, December, whenever it works out. And I think the last thing I'll just say on that is I've made this point often, but I just feel like I'm in support of the electrification work we're doing, but I also know that it's controversial and it's not like the most broad support always for a lot of the things that we end up tackling. And it would be nice to get something that we work on that has like very broad support and feels like a very visible culture shift and has like that tangible impact that people are also seeing in the community. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity on the consumption-based side, where we can do some of those things as a city that feels like, oh, we're also seeing visible changes in our daily lives.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other thoughts? I think we have I think what I've gathered is September, hopefully we'll do the growth plan, land use, October climate action partner grant program, November, the policy scan. That sound good to everybody?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I think this is maybe the earliest. Yeah. You can adjourn the meeting.
Yeah,
Karen?
no one has any other comments or questions? If not, we will adjourn the meeting.
Wow, 5 or 2 minutes.
Yeah.